Good morning. So, I have the honor to start today's event, the first keynote lecture. It's a pleasure to see a full area here, so almost all seats are taken. So that's nice that some of you are interested in what I'm going to talk about today, especially given that most of you have a tech background, which I do not, on paper at least. And I'm not going to talk about a typical computer science topic. I'll be talking about mergers and acquisitions and the way we use data analytics in this context. So since I guess that not all of you are familiar with mergers and acquisitions, so I brought a short intro before we talk about why data analytics is so important in that space, what we do at Deloitte, why I think this is a fun job if you like working with numbers, if you like using data analytics tools and methodologies. Okay, sorry. All right. So mergers and acquisitions. We're talking about companies being sold or companies being bought. And that is something that happens all the time in all industries because, as you can imagine, the economic environment, regulatory environments are changing all the time. So there's a myriad of reasons why companies engage in M&A. And M&A, company transactions, are actually, those are the largest, most complex investments companies can make. And they are accordingly complex. So I brought a few reasons here. Typical reasons for M&A are realigning your portfolio, investing in new markets, divesting from no longer attractive markets, investing in new technologies, etc. Trying to realize synergies, economies of scale, economies of scope, etc. The details are not so important. What's important for you is the takeaway that those are large projects usually. They involve whole companies. So there's a lot of things to think about, right? If you're selling a company, you're selling the assets of the company, you're selling all the contracts of the company, you're transferring people, you're changing the way a company is run, you're changing ownership, etc. And you need a lot of advice on what to do there. Now, since we're talking about technology today, and as I said, so company engage in M&A to adapt to changing environments, changing their strategy, their operations. A major factor that has been driving change in the last 15 years or so is digitalization, right? So if you look at companies today, they collect way more data than they used to. They have way more digital tools in place. They have often, sometimes, digital business models which generate data upon which business success depends. So there's a lot to think about in terms of digitalization. This means that deals become more complex. This also means that the areas you have to think about when you're buying or selling a company also get more diverse, right? So a topic you're familiar with, IT, if you're selling a company, or maybe if you're not selling the whole company, but the part of the company, at some point you have to think about what happens to IT, right? That's usually a shared service. So what happens afterwards? Do you need separate ITs? Do you need service agreements that maybe one part of the company is still in charge and then lends you some of those IT capabilities for a fee, of course, etc. Then there are regulatory changes that happen. For example, think about all the environmental, social, and governmental issues that affect companies nowadays. You have to think about those when you're buying or selling a company. And thinking about those issues involves data. You really want to understand the issues at hand and really understand what's going on. And that's why we have data analytics experts who not only understand the issues, but are able to process all the data involved and make sense of the information that is involved in a deal. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Before we dive into more details, I brought you a study which we did at Deloitte. And we asked financial investors what they consider important when they invest into a company. And Deloitte is one of the large audit companies, and a typical service we offer to clients is what we call a financial due diligence. So when we are asked to support a deal, we look into the company's financials, business model, etc., and try to make sense of what the economics are behind a business model in terms of financials. And of course, there's no deal, there's no M&A transaction which you can do without a financial due diligence. But what's important is when we ask financial investors, what's the next most important thing you need, right? We see that data cubes, data analytics are already the second most important item. And every fourth investor says actually the data cube or data analytics is the next most important issue you need. And when I'm talking about a data cube here, it really means assembling financial, operational, and other data from the company to really understand what the issues are at stake when you're looking at such companies. And I'm not talking about small data sets here. Just to give you an idea, so I've been with Deloitte for 10 years. One of the first deals I did was a carve-out transaction 10 years ago in which a huge chemical company sold part of its business. So they were saying, we want to get rid of certain products which are produced in different countries. We do have shared R&D facilities, we do have shared IT, overhead, of course, etc. But we really want to carve out this part of the company and split the company in half. So the data involved for that was data from more than 100 legal entities or companies spread across more than 100 countries in the world. Those companies had more than 30,000 cost centers, and the part of the company to be sold had a product portfolio of more than 24,000 different materials, right? So if you're thinking about a company like Coca-Cola, you always think, okay, they're selling Coke. It's actually more complex, right? Because you have different flavors, you have different sizes, they are sold in different boxes, etc. And that's a very low-key product portfolio, right? In industry businesses that easily gets up to many thousands of different products. Those products involve materials, raw materials, being sold, and that's not a figure that is unusual, from often more than 100,000 different suppliers, right? Which provide raw materials at different prices, different conditions, shipping, etc. So there's a lot of data involved even in the basics of what you're actually selling. So again, back to the question, what is actually being sold, which assets, which products, and what are the economics behind that? And understanding all that involves a lot of data for which you need appropriate tools and data analytics capabilities. All right. When we talk about those issues, of course, no single advisor can cover everything. We at Deloitte, being the largest professional service firm in the world, we actually do cover everything, but we do have multiple work streams. So when we think about M&A, we think about this as a process. We start out with a strategy. Why do we want to engage in mergers and acquisitions? What is the purpose behind that? Why am I trying to sell a part of my company? Why do I want to invest in other companies, etc.? Once that decision has been made, you start preparing. You're doing research on the target company. You're assembling information on the company you want to sell. All those data sources I just mentioned. So you prepare for the deal, and then you start into execution, which means you start the diligence phase. You talk with investors. You talk with banks, how to finance those deals. You have a myriad of additional advisors who look at specific topics within the company. Just to give you a flavor of all the different due diligence advisors you often have. You have finance, as I mentioned. You have commercial, which looks into market situations, competition, etc. You have IT, which is very important, which is not my area of expertise, but which is relevant, I guess, for many of you in the room. You do have operations, right? So what happens in the machine room, in the assembly lines, etc. You do have business due diligence. You do have HR topics and many, many more. And all those require experts and all those require data. So execution is really important. But once you've done a deal, you're not done, right? So then starts what we call the integration or post-merger phase, in which you have to think about what am I going to do with the company? If you are a company yourself, you have to integrate what you have bought, right? If you are a financial investor, you need to run the company you have bought on your own, which is different from when you buy a company as a whole or only a part. If you buy only a part, you have to think about how to run finance afterwards on your own, how to run IT afterwards on your own, etc. We do all this, and we do have many different topics where we use data analytics tools. When we are advising on the sell side, we usually start with what we call a vendor assistance. So preparing the deal, so that's mostly preparation, but we also do financial simulations, so which aims at creating a business plan. And if we do this from a data analytics perspective, this really means looking at detailed sales and cost data to understand to which clients am I selling which products, at which conditions, where is growth coming from. So where am I successful, where aren't I successful, what are margins in different markets for different products or services or what have you. And all this is being modeled then to make a prediction for the future or to come up with a business plan, which is absolutely crucial because you can't get financing for a deal without a business plan. We do have experts who look into what we call commercial insights, taking a market perspective. So using data to model how markets work, competitive dynamics, looking at potential expansions. So something we often do from a data analytics perspective is to look at how can I grow a business model? Where do I have white spots? For example, using geographic or competitive data, seeing where can I open new stores? Where can I acquire new customers? What is the value associated with those white spots, or which can be locations, etc. And we have a couple more. Because I'm running a bit out of time, I'm going to skip a little and talk about what we do in a vendor assistance. All right. So as I said, there's a lot of data involved. I just gave you the numbers. Where we typically start in the beginning is we quickly make up our mind what the key areas of investigation are. And then we start talking to the company and discussing where to get data, right? And if you're talking about financial data, of course, every company has financial accounting, controlling, etc. There's some data being assembled centrally at headquarters, which give you profits and loss statements, balance sheets, etc. But that's high-level information. It's nonetheless important to start with high-level information in those deals, because basically that's audited information upon which an auditor has said those numbers are correct. For the purpose of a transaction, you need to go deeper. This is when you start talking to IT, controlling, etc. about where do I get additional information. I do not want to understand only how much profit do you make. I want to understand where the profit is coming from. So you really need to do a deep dive into operational systems, ideally looking at individual customers in individual markets and individual products to understand the dynamics of what's happening. And that's only the profit side. So once you have covered that, you look into costs. So what areas of the company are generating costs? Which of those costs can I directly attribute to the company being sold? What kind of costs are shared costs and have to be modeled for a envisioned transaction afterwards, etc. And what our data analytics team does is then, when we have identified all those sources, we start putting them together into what we call a data cube. And that's what I said in the beginning. Investors nowadays say they really need a good data cube to support a transaction. So, since you are tech people, this does not mean setting up any crazy infrastructure. This does not mean setting up any data interfaces whatsoever. We are talking about a single purpose database, which basically goes to the trash bin once the deal is done, right? The main difference here to typical IT and infrastructure topics is that the most important issue is data quality and that data needs to be correct. And this needs to be done in a short amount of time, right? You do not have a lot of time if you're competing with other interested parties who want to buy the same company. You do not have a lot of time if you have to consider after the transaction, right? You really need to split a company or change how the company is run. So what we do is we use database tools that allow us to assemble a data cube that reflects all of those issues, not within months or weeks, which would already be very short in an IT integration project. No, we do this within days. And often, if we look at certain areas only, for example, sales, as I mentioned, products, customers, etc., we'll only do this within days. We have to do this within hours. So we really need people who are savvy, working with data, running ETL processes immediately, processing all that data, and now the important part, who are also able to understand this sort of data. And this is why I think this is such a fun job, because every project is different. Every project is fast and immediate. You have to understand the business model. You have to understand how to make sense of the data, which means understanding how the company works, whom do I need to talk to if I have questions, and how to make sense of all that information for investors. And that's really the fun part. You need to be a good programmer, but you also need to have a very good business understanding, which is fun because every project is different, every company is different, every business model is different, and this allows you to always do something else. And this really also differentiates our analytics teams from many industry analytics teams, because we are not a back office team, right, who set up large implementation projects, create nice reports for other people to look at. We are the same people who look at the numbers. And we do this as one, and it's often the same person who programs the data, who runs the analysis, who draws the conclusion, and then makes recommendations based upon the outcome. So that's what's really interesting. Okay, I do have 1 minute left, but I think we can go to a Q&A now. I was told that many of you would appreciate me doing this in English, but if you have questions in Germany, that's fine as well.
First, a big applause for you. If anyone has any question, German, English, doesn't matter, I will be there and hand you the microphone. There is one. I'm just gonna jump.
Hi, thank you for the talk. So I have a strong background in data analytics, but not the business part. And I agree that it sounds really fun. And I wonder, like, do you get this business background from experience, or do you need a business degree?
Okay, that was a great question. So she was asking whether you need a business degree to do this kind of work. No, you do not. Actually, my boss, he has a doctor in physics, so no business background at all. We have many people who have a tech background. We have many people who have a background in economics, social science, etc. But you need to be interested in learning. Working with financial data also requires to understand the rules of how financial data are created. That's not something which you have to study, but for which you need to be eager to learn, and you need to learn all the time. And that's a point I made earlier also, is data can tell you a lot, but data is never the whole truth, right? The data we're working with, those are man-made. There are processes behind the data, right? If a person in a company books a transaction, for example, a Coke being sold, right? There are rules behind what kind of sales are being entered into the system, how costs are allocated to that sale. There are tax issues involved. There are currency translation issues involved, and those differ a lot across the different companies you look at. So you need to be eager to learn, and you need to also do the research every time, again and again. Of course, you get experience to understand what you're doing. So in the past, we had people who were awesome programmers, but they always thought, I'm so good at programming, I don't need to learn other stuff. This doesn't work.
Are there any more questions? There's one. I was so loud.
Thank you very much. I'm Volnat from Kosovo. I want to know if it's more important to study on economics in case to know how to present the data, how to collect based on the output that you want to present, or it's more important to be a programmer and to know how to input the data?
I can only iterate on what I just said. You actually need to be savvy in both. If you have a background in economics, and we have many economists in our team, those are people who do learn econometrics, statistics in university, and they do know all the standard statistical analysis programs, which are very powerful for standard data transformation and loading, for statistical analysis, data visualization, and so forth. So those are base skills which many people already bring to the table. As I said, since we do not set up infrastructure, that's not something you need, right? You need to be able to use the tools and how to work with data. Since data analytics tools are getting more easy to use, we're seeing more and more people who are actually coming from the business side, learning how to use the technology. It used to be the other way around, because programming was so difficult for people who didn't learn it, that you did have a hard requirement or a necessary condition of being a good programmer. But since the world is evolving, it's changing. But you need to be willing, in the end, to do both parts of the work. Otherwise, it doesn't work out.
There's time for one question.
Thanks a lot. How do you interpret the data? Is it expert knowledge at Deloitte? So are experts in every field considering the data individually and or manually, let's say? Or are you even using, as you just said, analytics tools? How are those tools generated or even modeled? Let's say, are you automating things or?
Also a very good question. How do you know how to analyze this kind of data? Whether that's expert knowledge or even tool-driven, etc. Of course, over time, you do acquire a lot of expert knowledge. And I give you an example. So, for example, if you look at software businesses, right? And nowadays, companies, startups that sell software usually have a subscription model. So you're selling contracts to clients, subscriptions, and you're collecting recurring fees for those subscriptions over time. That's a very different business model from sending Coke to stores, which is then bought by customers. Because with a subscription, those recurring revenues, you can plan ahead, right? If you have signed a new client for 3 years, you know I will get amount X every month. So there's a completely different way to look at subscription revenues versus other revenues. And of course, you do have certain ideas how to break changes in those revenues into a model and how to model those over time. For example, you look at how many new customers did I acquire each month? How many customers terminated their contracts? Which customers added additional functionality, which we call upsell? Which customers terminated not all of their contracts, but some? So this is a base idea of how to model those data. But as I said, it's never the same, right? Then there are companies who sell a single software. Others have a portfolio of software where cross-sell is interesting, right? Can I buy additional products to an existing client? What about pricing? How does pricing work? Is it tied to single licenses, the number of seats? Is it maybe even tied to computing power, etc.? So there are very different ways how businesses work, and the business determines how to analyze the data, not the other way around. That's what I said. You need to understand what you're analyzing and not come with a prefixed idea. I'm a great coder and this is my model I always run. It will not work.
Great, thank you.
Thank you all so much. If you have any other questions, then Matthias is still here.
Yes.
You can ask the questions to him, and obviously at the Deloitte booth. So there are a lot of people that can answer all your questions, and a big applause for you again.
Thanks a lot.